Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another Urban League of Louisiana virtual town hall meeting. I'm Judy Reese Morse, President and CEO, and we are so glad that you have sharing your time and attention with us to engage around one of the most important topics in America, police reform. We named this town hall Police Reform with a question mark because for many, it's hard to believe that police departments can be reformed or even transformed into organizations that protect and serve all residents. Here at the Urban League, we know that we must talk first and then we must act to change bad policies and create new ones to ensure the kind of police departments that will work for everyone. What will it take for police reform to happen? Is defunding the answer? Is it a reallocation of funds from police departments to social service areas like mental health or conflict resolution? Is it training? Is it consent decrees? Or is it the work of Mr. Trump's police reform executive order? We have an incredible lineup of speakers and moderators who will share some of their perspectives and their ideas for all of us to consider. We're taking it all in here at the Urban League, and we'll be sharing it with those we serve, our parents, our students, our job seekers, our small business owners, family members, and communities, so that when there are opportunities to act, they will have the information and the tools they need to engage. Since mid-March, the Urban League has hosted 8 town halls to ensure that information about topics including COVID-19, small business development, education, workforce, health equity, and now police reform, and we're just getting started. We must remain informed. We must keep the lines of communication open. We must stay focused on the issues, and we must work together to get the change that we deserve. So let's keep pushing together, and I know that we will be successful. As we get ready to begin tonight, we want you to know that we are recording this town hall and that it'll be ready for you to view tomorrow morning on the Urban League website. If you have a question, use the chat function to enter your question. We'll try our best to get to as many of them as possible. So now let's get started. We have a phenomenal list of opening speakers, including Marc Morial, President of the National Urban League, U.S. Congressman Cedric Richmond, Louisiana State Senator Cleo Fields, Louisiana State Representative Ted James, and New Orleans City Council President Jason Williams. Each of them will spend just a few minutes giving us the context for our panel discussions that will follow. This evening, we will go first to U.S. Congressman Cedric Richmond. Congressman Richmond?
Judy, let me just thank you, and I hope that you can see me, and I hope that my sound is coming in loud and clear. Thank you for allowing me to go first. As you all know or may not know, tomorrow we are going to mark up in committee the George Floyd Injustice in Policing Act of 2020. So long story short, we will pass out of committee tomorrow our comprehensive bill that was led by the Congressional Black Caucus and our chairwoman, Karen Bass. We will then get it to the floor of the House probably by the end of next week. Right now, we have 227 co-sponsors of the bill. It only takes 218 to pass, so I am sure that it's going to pass out of the House. And then it'll get to the Senate. And that's where it's going to be important that we continue to use our voices to raise attention, awareness, and to further this movement that so many people in the country have participated in and joined. And so this is not going to be led by politicians. This is not necessarily going to be led by activists. Well, not activists, but community representatives. This is going to be led by people, just ordinary people who are raising their voices to say enough is enough. So I don't want to talk too long because I do have to go catch my flight so that I can be there in the morning because of the limited flights to DC. Let me just go through the 12 things that this bill does, and I can do that very quickly. First, it would change the intent requirement in so that you can hold a police officer criminally liable for, now it would go from willfully to knowingly or recklessly depriving a person of their civil rights. This standard is more reasonable, and it is what we've been pushing for a long time so that we can hold our police officers accountable. Second, it would eliminate qualified immunity for federal and state law enforcement officers and agencies based on excessive force complaints. Third, it would enhance the Department of Justice's ability to do pattern and practice investigations into police departments, because it would give them subpoena power to get records, data, and evidence from those police departments. Fourth, it would incentivize independent investigations of police when they use deadly force. Fifth, it would create a national law enforcement misconduct registry, which is important because that way officers who get disciplined in one jurisdiction simply can't move to another jurisdiction and get hired by a police department. We would create a registry that would allow citizens and police departments to search names and see who has excessive force complaints. Six, it would establish a use of force data reporting requirements for police departments to release their data on use of force. Seven, it would finally prohibit racial and religious profiling. Eight, it would ban no-knock warrants in the use of no-knock warrants in drug cases, so that you can't just run in someone's house and execute a search warrant without announcing yourself as police officers. Number nine, it would incentivize the banning on a local level of chokeholds or carotid holds that limit breathing. Number 10, it would limit the transfer of military-grade equipment to police departments. Number 11, it would require law enforcement officers, one, to wear body cameras, and two, it will prohibit the use of facial recognition technology by federal and state law enforcement agencies, because what we found in Congress is that that technology has a racial bias component to it, where it wrongly identifies African Americans, and we don't want, we're not ready for that, and we don't want it. And number 12, it would establish a national use of force standard by police officers, so that we have one standard, everyone knows what it is. So our goal is to get that out of the House tomorrow. That hearing will be from 10 o'clock Eastern, and it will go as long as it takes. Hopefully we will finish tomorrow. If not, we will finish Thursday and vote it out. But I will just say that this has been a long time coming. We would not be here today but for the loud voices of people who are peacefully protesting and raising awareness of this. This has been an issue, dates back, the first commission that raised this as an issue goes back to 1948, which was well before the Kerner Commission and Barack Obama's 21st Century Policing Task Force. So we have to do it. It's been a long time coming, but I want you all to know that we're not there yet, and we're going to have to keep pushing. So the Urban League plays a very important part of it. The Urban League of Louisiana, National Urban League, with two outstanding leaders, Judy, Reese, Marc, and of course, Marc Morial, my former mayor in New Orleans. And with that, let me just yield back the balance of my time and just say thank you for what you're doing. And those that are on the town hall, please encourage others to watch it. And please continue to raise awareness of police excessive force, racial inequities around the country. And at some point, we will have to get to the point where we talk about jobs as a part of justice also. So thank you. With that, Judy, I yield back.
Thank you so much, Congressman Richmond. We know that you have a flight to catch and that you made time to be with us. It was critical that we hear from you during this conversation, so we're very, very grateful to you for making the time to be with us. Next up, we want to have Representative Ted James with the Louisiana House of Representatives, District 101, to say a few words about a resolution that he has introduced during this special session of the legislature. Representative James.
Good evening, and thank you, Judy, and thank you to the entire Urban League of Louisiana for once again bringing those issues that are paramount to our communities to a discussion in which we can talk about not just where we are today, but where we're going. I decided to sit here in the House chamber today in what we traditionally call the People's House. And I wanted to sit here because this is not just an issue that those of us that have been duly elected are going to solve. Just like Congressman Richmond, this is going to be an all hands on deck effort. And I'm so happy that the Urban League has always decided to be leaders in such movements. I'm sitting here and we have two resolutions. I filed a resolution to study issues regarding policing, de-escalation, trainings, what we're doing with police union contracts, as well as Senator Cleo Fields, who filed a joint resolution in the Senate. And our goal is to improve upon some of the reforms that we made in 2017 after the murder of Alton Sterling, because we know we have done a lot to increase training here, but we still have those bad actors. And if we are not going to prosecute those bad actors, then it doesn't matter the level of training that we are going to require of them. One of the most important things that we're going to look at, the Congressman talked about qualified immunity. In this body tomorrow, State Representative Edmund Jordan has a bill to end qualified immunity for police officers. That bill will be heard in the House Committee on Civil Law. So those of you Louisiana residents, reach out to all of the members of the Civil Law Committee and urge them to support that legislation. We've heard a lot from stakeholders across the country about ending qualified immunity, but we are giving them an opportunity to actually vote on that legislation on tomorrow. We've seen responses from all across the country. We've seen protests all across this country and even in various countries across the globe. On tomorrow in this House, we are going to allow those folks that stood with us a few weeks ago to have the opportunity to put their vote where their mouths were a few weeks ago. So it's important that we join hands. And I would like to also say that the Urban League is a part of both my resolution and Senator Fields' concurrent resolution, which we've decided to go with that resolution. That resolution will be on the House floor in short order because Senator Fields, he was so proud and able to get 34 co-authors. So we have an instrument that's pending here on the House floor. So we decided not to run both instruments. So my HR will be included in Senator Fields' legislation, and we're going to make sure that all of you that are listening have an opportunity to help us as we prepare to craft those laws to end discrimination at the hands of police officers. I mean, it's not just an indictment on every police officer because we know that every police officer is not bad. But if we continue to ignore what's happening in Black and brown communities at the hands of law enforcement officers, then we are not doing our jobs here. Thank you. I look forward to enjoying this conversation and look forward to the weeks and months ahead because we have a lot of work to do.
Thank you so much, Representative James. We appreciate the hard work that you are doing in the legislature on behalf of the issues that matter most to the African American community. We will now hear from National Urban League President Marc Morial, former mayor of New Orleans. President Morial, are you with us?
Okay, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Hey, okay, first of all, Judy, let me thank you and the Urban League of Louisiana for convening today's discussion and also say good evening to everyone who's participating today. I do know what it means to miss New Orleans. New Orleans is my hometown each night and day. My work just requires me to be where I am today. So I miss everyone, and it's just great to be able to be part of a discussion. It was great to hear Representative James talk about the work he's doing with Senator Fields. And Senator Fields and I served in the Senate together many years ago, and both of Representative James and Senator Fields are doing what we want our legislators to do: be serious about legislating and about advancing legislative proposals that address the issues of the day and the issues of our time. Police reform, or should more aptly be called in this era, the reimagination of policing and public safety in communities. New Orleans has had several chapters of police reform. There was a chapter in the late 70s and the early 80s when my late father sought to reform the police department. He encountered great challenges and obstacles, including the 1979 police strike. But what happened in the 1979 police strike is something that creates an opportunity today in New Orleans that many cities don't have. As a result of that police strike, the back of the New Orleans Police Union, the Police Association of New Orleans, was broken, and they were required to go back to work without a collective bargaining agreement. So to this day, there is no collective bargaining agreement that governs issues related to police officer hiring, firing, discipline, use of force, or deployment. The second chapter of police reform took place during my time as mayor, when I think we were successful in changing the New Orleans Police Department from one of the worst in the country to one of the best with the country, with the leadership of Richard Pennington and his partnership with me, which I think made a great difference. But implicit in that effort in the 1990s was what people are talking about today, and that was a greater commitment to human services, to social services, to youth services as a part of the approach to make communities safer, healthier, and certainly happier. We did that work in the 1990s and in the early 2000s. The third chapter is the chapter which began with the current New Orleans Police Department consent decree, which has been ongoing for a number of years. After my time leading the city and really engineering a tremendous reform effort, when I left office, the New Orleans Police Department had an 80% approval rating amongst the people. It had achieved national accreditation and won national awards. We reduced the crime rate, we reduced the brutality rate, we reduced the rate of civil rights complaints, and overall made the department and its leadership more diverse. But that was undone by the leadership team that followed me in City Hall, and then Katrina damaged the situation even further. So New Orleans' path, its current effort under its consent decree, is not the first time there's been an effort to fix the department. What I would say today is for cities like New Orleans and Baton Rouge and Shreveport and Monroe and Lafayette, what we need is an investment in addressing human needs in a very significant way. Police officers, for number one, should not be responding to homelessness. They should not be responding to mental health issues. That should be situated, organized, and deployed in a different department or a different function of government. Certainly, if there's a situation where there's violence or an outright act of a felony, police should be deployed, but not to take care of the situation. Sweeping the streets of homeless people is not a solution to homelessness and exacerbates homelessness. Having police go out and encounter citizens that have mental issues sometimes leads to problems. So policing, and I don't think policing in the modern era and many police leaders would resist the reallocation of responsibilities and the reallocation of duties as a part of an overall plan in terms of how we spend money. Let me add one final thought, because I think the discussion of reform, and that is to applaud the work of our Congressman Cedric Richmond, who I know spoke earlier as a leader on the Judiciary Committee. We've worked hand in glove with Congressman Richmond, Congresswoman Karen Bass of Los Angeles, Congressman Hakeem Jeffries of Brooklyn, and a number of other members of the House Judiciary Committee to shape a significant piece of legislation called the Justice in Policing Act, which does the things that are necessary and the hard things from a federal standpoint to ensure that police officers are held accountable. Today, the president issued an executive order. The executive order, in my opinion, was written with invisible ink or disappearing ink because it requires nothing. It's a lot of voluntary steps. What the president should do is join us in supporting the Justice in Policing Act. Senator Tim Scott from South Carolina, and Tim is someone who we have political different points of view, but I have respect for him. He's always available for a conversation. But his bill, very much the same, doesn't have the teeth, doesn't have the heft, doesn't have the robustness we need or that people who are in the streets protesting want when it comes to fixing police. So there's a role for the federal government and for a new federal law. That is not enough because it is on mayors and local communities and city council members and police leadership to do the other things that are necessary to reinvent, to reimagine, and to reform American policing. This is a moment that we cannot afford to lose the public momentum, but also fail to recognize that a reimagined approach to public safety, a reimagined approach to healthy communities, new investments in people and in human capital can make us stronger, can make New Orleans stronger and all the cities in Louisiana, but all the cities across the nation. So I'd like you to join us. Call those two Louisiana United States senators, Senators Kennedy and Cassidy, at 202-224-3121, and let them know you support the Justice in Policing Act and you'd like them to vote for it. If you live outside of Congressman Richmond's district and you're in Louisiana, call your member. Make it clear. Make your voice heard. We don't want symbolic reform. We want real reform. We don't want a document with invisible or disappearing ink. We want something that's going to be strong and robust and permanent. So, Judy, thank you for having me today, and thank you for your leadership and the important work of our affiliate in Louisiana, the Urban League of Louisiana.
Thank you so much, Marc. We are so grateful to you and the work that you are doing around this country. We have 90 affiliates across the country, and Marc has to stretch himself and spread himself among all 90 of us who are all pushing as hard as we can to do the work in our cities and in our state. So thank you, Marc, for taking time out of your schedule to be with us.
Thank you for having me. See you soon.
Thank you, Marc. See you soon. Next up, we will hear from Jason Williams, who is the president of the New Orleans City Council. We have heard about a task force that Councilman Williams is going to be convening, and we're excited to hear about that. Councilman Williams.
Thank you, Judy, and thank you to the Urban League for always talking about the things that are truly important to our community. I hope y'all can hear and see me okay. As powerful as this global health pandemic of COVID-19 has been, it has literally shut down cities all over the world, but it was not powerful enough to stop the American pandemic of racism. The murder of a young Black man exercising, followed by a young woman in her home, another man completely complying with everything that the officers were asking him to do, 4 officers called, and then finally yet another man sleeping in his car. There's absolutely a moment in history right now that has become a global movement that keeps gaining momentum. And momentum is usually a very good thing that I'm happy about, but in this situation, this momentum is fueled by that old American strange fruit of Black bodies. And although a number of people are focused on police brutality, I really have to push back with some of the folks focusing on that in the streets, because it is so much bigger than just the police brutality. It is about the over-policing. It is about the policing of certain neighborhoods, the policing of certain people, Black, brown, and beige. This moment is really about the duality of a legal system that is firmly rooted, born out of, and really tailor-made to maintain white supremacy. Criminal justice system from inception has been made to protect one group and police and jail another. And when I was trying a lot of cases at criminal district court, you'd hear cops say often, we were doing proactive patrol in a high crime area. And I'd say, well, why is this a high crime area? So there's a lot of drugs, for example, in the Magnolia Housing Project when it was there. Well, I said, well, look, there's a lot of drugs at every dormitory at Tulane University, but I've never seen a police raid of a Tulane dorm. And so this is not just about what we are policing, but it is about who is getting policed. And I have to just remind everyone that four officers were called for the possibility of there being a counterfeit $20 bill. That is a that is, as Marc just said, we're calling the police for everything from cats and trees, mental health crises, addiction crises. It is a waste of resources to use police in the way that we have used them. But this is also about local prosecutors who sit idle when cops do wrong, which supports and encourages bad and corrupt police work. The criminal justice system has become so gluttonous that its agencies every year grow their budgets and take the lion's share of city resources in every city without any regard for public safety metrics. And there's little, if no, reliance on the outcomes or success rates of what this money is being spent on. So it's time that we look at the entire criminal justice system and say, what is success? Is it the number of convictions? Is it the number of trials? Is it the number of cases? No, as Marc said, it's time to reimagine the criminal justice system, not just policing, but reimagining the criminal justice system. And we can make it people-centric and focus on keeping people out of the system and out of the court by using diversion programs after arrests are made, whether they be valid or not, providing real intervention services that really help people become better men and women than trying to repair them after being in the criminal justice. It is so easy, and we have become so used to in the criminal justice system putting that hot letter F on the backs of men and women. It's just like that hot brand was put on the backs of men and women so long ago, and it takes away their ability to work. It disenfranchises them from the workforce and their ability to vote, and on and on and on. What if we treated poor, disconnected people the same way we treat rich, connected people? Let them pay their debts through different and more creative means. Give them the tools to succeed rather than traps to snare them again and again. So one of the things that we're working on now, and I propose a community advisory committee, and I'm hoping that we can name this the Jerome Big Duck Smith Advisory Committee, that will help the New Orleans City Council and the Criminal Justice Committee decide how we spend taxpayer dollars year in and year out, so that we are actually getting better outcomes, so that we're investing in folks who have the resources, the tools to respond effectively to someone in a mental health crisis, to respond to addiction crisis. Because frankly, an officer with tear gas, with pepper spray, with a taser, with a billy club and a gun, those are none of the tools that can successfully pull someone out of a mental health crisis. So we're not being smart, and it's time for us to be smart. And I hope that this committee looking at the budget with myself and my colleagues and doing reports day in and day out, we can talk about how we reinvest so that we not only reform police departments, but we make real lasting change by reforming the entire criminal justice system. Right now, if a cop is caught lying on the stand, the case may be thrown out, but nothing happens to the cop. The judges have to report that information to the leadership of the NOPD so that that bad police work gets dealt with. Local prosecutors have to use their resources to check the police because the system is designed for the screening agencies to check the homework of police and call out bad behavior before it gets to the point of taking a human life. So I'm hoping that this advisory committee, made up of individuals in the community who have been working for years with marginalized folks, like Our Voice Nostra Vote, Women with a Vision, Breakout, voices like Flozell Daniels, voices like Norris Henderson from Vote. These folks need to be on the inside looking at every dollar spent in this city to make sure that we're spending it on things that actually build up the community rather than tearing it down. So I look forward to listening to the other comments today and listening to the Q&A and the panel discussions. The only way to make real lasting change is to reform the whole system, but that is with national and local institutional change, formal, written reform policies that will outlive the tenure of a Jason Williams or whoever comes next on the city council, or whoever the next police chief or mayor is. We have to make real change that doesn't die with a person or a councilmanic term, but lasts so that young people don't have to go through the same things we've been going through for so long.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Williams. I have to tell you, I love the name of your task force, and I love the gentleman for whom that task force will be named. Thank you for that honor for Mr. Smith. Thank you for the great work that you are doing, and we look forward to hearing more about your task force and the members of that task force.
Thank you, Judy.
Now we're going to go to our first panel discussion. I want to introduce the moderator for this discussion. He is the one and only Flozell Daniels. He serves as the president of the Foundation for Louisiana. It is hard to live in Louisiana and care about any of the issues facing the African American community and not know Flozell Daniels. So there's really no need for me to say anything more other than to introduce him and have him start our first conversation. Flozell?
Excellent. Thank you, Judy, and thanks to the Urban League of Louisiana, my family, for hosting this critically important conversation, for giving us a chance to bring in some of the state's leading experts and activists on this issue. This is a moment in history, I think, for this country. I really appreciate my mayor, Marc Morial, talking about the need for this to be broader than, as the Urban League is suggesting, police reform with a question mark. This is a community safety and a public safety conversation.
Yeah, took it already.
Oh, and we have impaneled some of the most thoughtful folks who are doing the work from multiple places. So I'm going to jump right into it and introduce our panelists. We're going to go through some questions and answers here as a way of having this conversation. First, we have civil rights lawyer Alana Odom, with the executive director of the ACLU of Louisiana. So good to see you, good sister. We have civil rights activist and founder and executive director of Voice of the Experienced, the one and only Norris Henderson, with us. We also have Michael Flanagan, president of the Louisiana NAACP, with storied history here in Louisiana. And of course, on Antonio Travis, who is the founder of Black Man Rising, representing in some ways the organizers and the activists, particularly from the youth community, lifting up and bringing their voice, has always been the case, to move these issues forward. We're going to move into questions. I just want to acknowledge the work of so many people. Marc Morial talked about the history of this work over the last 40 or 50 years, and there are many folks who could not be with us today. OPPRC, I think about the incredible work of creating the Independent Police Monitor, all the policy advocates and survivors and funders. We'll be able to speak to some of these issues as we go through the questions. My first question, I'm going to direct to you, Alana, and to Norris, if you can answer this question. What is your perspective on really community safety and what role police may play in it with regard to specific strategies that you'd like to see implemented? What are you thinking about these things? Alana, let's start with you.
So I just want to say thank you so much to the Urban League, Judy, and to Marc for asking me to be with you this evening. I'm excited and I'm really proud, and also to Flozell as well, our moderator, for all the work that he does and the way he shows up for our community. I'm glad that you finished your kind of segue remarks and introductory remarks by talking about Susan Hudson at the Independent Police Monitor and OPPRC and the coalition, the broad coalition of folks that are actually fighting for real community safety, real public safety. And I think President Morial really, maybe that would be kind of prolific, President Marc Morial said it best when he said that we really do need an entire re-envisioning and a reimagining of the role of police in our society. And that is frankly because we know that police are not the best equipped to handle a broad swath of community health related issues, poverty related issues, and frankly, they are certainly not trained in a way that helps them understand structural racism, which is at the heart of all of what we are talking about here today. Police violence is a manifestation of structural inequality and structural racism. And I think that that is at the heart of where we have to go with this conversation. So when you hear the conversation about defunding police or divestment, really what we're talking about is this dramatic re-envisioning of what a safe society looks like and how we actually take care of victims, which is something that neither the district attorney nor the police actually do. And what we found in our lawsuits and also just in our community work is that district attorneys and police actually oftentimes use victims as pawns and are not actually helping victims get any closer to any closure or peace of mind around harm that has flowed to them. They are merely promising retribution, and retribution is not anything that we can hold on to in this life or in the next. And so how do we implement restorative justice practices? How do we have different agencies responding to our community when they are in harm's way? How do we make sure that our children are actually steeped in the kind of community support that we actually know that is going to support them? How do we make sure that educational opportunities are there where police are not actually at the are not standing between children and the schoolhouse doors to prevent that kind of trauma that we know is so ingrained in many of our Black and brown young people? So there are many strategies, but the divestment also goes to the reinvestment. And so what do we, when we take away, where do we put it? So we put it back into community, but then we also envision how our state and how our local and federal budget have to conform to this new idea of deconstructing structural racism. So from that money that we take away from police, where do we invest it? We invest it in schools. We invest it in mental health care. We invest it in decarceration, understanding that that is also an overblown system. So I think everyone here is really kind of singing from the same hymnal on this idea that public safety requires much more than just a police presence. It actually requires a dramatic re-envisioning of how police interact in our lives, and a de minimis role is what we are all suggesting that they should play.
Excellent. Thank you for that. As I transition to Norris, I do want to make the point that you've made the point that we're not only looking for the absence of brutality, the sort of state-sanctioned violence, we're looking for the presence of safety. Last year, just to note for our listeners, the murder clearance rate in New Orleans was about 40 to 41%. So there's a real question on the table about whether we're even getting the safety we deserve for the investment that's being made. Norris, what do you think about this, especially as it relates to specific strategies that you'd like to see implemented?
Well, one of the things I think now that we have everybody's ear, I think folks are more inclined to listen. I mean, we've been kind of like beating this drum, saying the emperor has no clothes on for 1,000 years. And finally, people are saying, wait a minute, the guy might be talking about something. We need to listen. And while I was sitting here listening at Marc talk and Cedric, I was thinking about the challenges you and I and Julie went through trying to get the current consent decree put in place, trying to get the police monitor's office put in place. And I was really struck by the difference between what we envisioned policing looking like and what those folks uptown who we were trying to ally with, what their version of what that looked like. And we were two different worlds. Fortunately for us that we kind of like circled the wagon around a collective that we were able to not only get the police monitor put in place, but we were able to kind of like start these reforms. Alana mentioned one thing, and Marc mentioned it also too, about the reimagining what policing look like. And I think what happens to us most of the time is that we allow other people to hijack the narrative. Like right now, people are saying in the streets, folks are saying defund the police. Well, I know exactly what they're talking about. Most of the folks probably on this phone know exactly what they're talking about. But folks who haven't been connected to this type of work are panicking like, oh my God, they're going to get rid of the police department. Nobody said nothing about getting rid of the police department. Folks are saying we just need to redistribute that money. We need to reallocate those dollars. When we talk about a resource officer at a school, I would venture to say nobody envisions a police. But the reality is that's a police. And so language has a big, big role in all this stuff that we're doing and talking about. But I think the very first thing we need to do is really take our narrative back to calm these people's fears or lay their fears that there will not be no police. I don't know what that would look like. I wasn't around at the time before they had police. And I don't think I'll be around the day when they won't. But the reality is that what we do with those resources, I remember several summers ago, we were pushing to take and reallocate. The city was looking to give the police department $4 million just to cover the summer months. And we was like, wait a minute. Me and Robert Goodman was like, oh, give us $1 million and we'll make it rain in the community and all your problems go away. This is about haves and have-nots. And when people use the police to kind of like, so to speak, keep people in their places, this is what we see. We see all this pent up frustration that's coming out now. And people are like, again, in the words of Fannie Lou Hamer, just sick and tired of being sick and tired, And so I think we can really make some inroads, but we got to continue to be truth tellers and hold everybody else to that very same standard. They have to tell the truth, be it for them or against it. I mean, that's the folks in law enforcement, because when we look at what happened, and everybody's quick to say, all the police not bad. I'm gonna give you that. But when you look at those people who are callous and different for what happened to George Floyd, they're worse than the guy who was kneeling on his neck, because they allowed that to happen. And it's more them than it is those folks who are misbehaving, because we know folks who are probably know folks who have done some dirty deeds, have never said anything about it, and that helps perpetuate these situations. So when something happens in the community and it explodes, everybody was like, well, how would that allow to happen? Because there's never really been consequences and repercussions because of people's behavior. So I'm hopeful that the ordinance that Councilman Williams talked about, that we can really put some teeth in it. The legislation that Congressman Richmond was talking about, that they have some teeth in it, that there has to be consequences and repercussions, because if there are no consequences and repercussions, this behavior will continue.
Absolutely. Thank you, Norris. One of the things I heard you say is that this is not about individuals. This is about institutional challenges and the opportunity to really reshape institutions. And I'm maybe putting words in your mouth. There's a real opportunity by way of specific recommendations to get rid of police in schools. Our police officers, something we want to see in schools. We can come back and have that conversation. Let me move to Mike McClanahan with Louisiana NAACP. And both, Mike, for you and for Antonio Travis, I want to ask this question. How would different reforms tangibly impact the community, right? There was some discussion earlier about the difference between policy work and whether it actually makes it to the ground. Describe what your vision for what police reform would look like and its actual tangible impact on community. Mike, can you start for us?
Yes, let me say good afternoon to all of you, to my friend Norris. If you can see me, I have a vote shirt on. I'd like to say hello to Alana. We were just in Baton Rouge at the state capitol fighting, so I appreciate the Urban League giving me the opportunity. But a few years ago, in another life, I taught at Southern University. I taught police community relations. And that class I had, all of my students would actually write papers on and do projects on what police officers would do in the community, how they fit into the community. And they should blend into the community. They should never stick out like a flower on a wall or stick out like a sore thumb. They should be embedded into the fabric of the community. After the Sterling murder, we went about the same thing as you alluded to, trying to change how officers police communities. We were talking about they had to live in the community that they patrol. They would have to go to church at some point in time in the communities that they patrol. They had to give time, voluntary time back to the community that they serve, so the community could get to know them and they get to know the community. So therefore they will be less apt to come in with a preconceived notion about what's happening in any particular community. And so after the Sterling murder, I had to remind people that this is Louisiana. This is a slave state. This was a holdout because we just got 12-12 unanimous verdict, jury verdict. We had 10-12 for years. And so I was reminded when we were fighting at the legislature for change, I was reminded when we were at the Attorney General Jeff Landry's office for 30 days about however slow things change in Louisiana. But so I'm so glad that you all are the Urban League has.
Mike, I think we lost you. Are you still there?
In fact, continue to work because it's definitely needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Antonio.
Yeah. Appreciate you, brother.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank everybody, all the elders and OGs who did all the work to lead us up into this moment. I want to highlight them and thank them first. But to answer the question, I would say let's look at the predominantly white schools in Orleans Parish, the communities that have control of their resources to if we want to see tangible results. It's amazing to me that we live in an almost predominantly Black district, yet when we talk about trauma and we talk about those things, and we talk about like literally like the average New Orleanian walking around with PTSD, that you have more cops in your schools than you have counselors. And that's reflective of the community. And so to me, I think honestly for young people, it's just blatant disrespect. And maintaining that status quo is not what people are trying to do. People are upset and people are angry. And so when we talk about reform, we're basically talking about doing what been needed to be done. We've been needed alternatives to the punitive practices that's been happening in our community. We've been needed something happening. And the fact that it always takes something horrific to happen for people to say, oh, let's sit down and have a conversation about it, just further speaks to how much Black people in this country, people of color in this country, are often marginalized and disrespected. And so, like I said, man, just talking to parents and talking to young people, people are upset, people are tired. Police reform, reform period, is not having SROs in schools. It's amazing to me that in predominantly Black schools, we got SROs and cops, and we talk about healthy school climates. And Louisiana ranked almost last in every category across the board. And we act like we don't know why. But when we go into our communities, like the answer is there. There are people, they literally had a parent, and I talked to her, and I'm not gonna say a name, but they literally had a parent crying out because she don't have any resources to deal with her daughter, so she got to call the cops.
Mhm.
They got kids who, I call it Einstein Charter School. And where one of my mentees attend that charter school is a predominantly Latino and Asian school. They had no SROs, they had no metal detectors, they had none of that stuff. He said as black kids started to flow in, he started seeing metal detectors and SROs, and he noticed then that they weren't trying to protect him from outside people, they were trying to protect them from them. So the myth, if people believe it, that the kids don't see what's going on, and that the kids don't see that you put your money where your mouth is. And for far too long, we've always put money in practices that hurt us all the time. And so when we get these reactions that we get, when we see crime spiking up and we see these things happening, we act like we're confused on why it happens. Now the answer is right there. The answer has been plain, it's been present, it's been in our face the whole time. And we not brought to the tables when it's time to be, when it's time to make moves, and it's time to make power decisions. The people on the ground, the people who live in these communities should always be at those tables. They should always be the ones making those decisions. And more times than not, that's not what's happening with everybody. Everybody not doing that. And so if we want to talk about real reform, let's reallocate that money and put it into our community. So our people who walking around here with PTSD are not doing, having to, when they hit their breaking point, do some of the things that they had to do. And I completely understand why they do what they do, because I live in a community and I'm around the people all the time. And so when these things happen, if we really want to see change, let's put our money, let's put our money where our mouth is, because I can tell you from firsthand experience, the young people are tired, man. They fed up. And it ain't gonna be it ain't gonna, like, in all honesty, it ain't nothing peaceful about what's gonna come if things keep happening the way that it's happening. To be frank and to be completely honest, like school board seats up, young people saying, man, look, I'm not trying to let these people who've been messing over us all this time run for school board. We're gonna run for school board. You know, like that's just the urgency people have. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, in that Wakanda, put the money where your mouth is and call it a day. Appreciate it.
Listen, I appreciate both of your answers. Again, what we're hearing is no cops in schools, more investment in education. One of the things, Antonio, that we know, I think back to David Halberstam, a famed journalist who wrote a book called The Children. We see time and time again, it's young people who are going to actually lead us to the next level of opportunity, to the next level of freedom and justice. We appreciate the work that you all are doing in pushing all of us to do better for generations to come. I want to jump into what will be the last question for the panel. I got a couple of tweaks I want to add just in case we have time, but we're getting short here. So I want to make sure we get this in and get as thorough as possible with regard to moving the conversation to action. As Judy said at the top of this, the Urban League of Louisiana doesn't only like to talk, it has a history of moving people to action, bringing together folks from all parts of society to figure out how to be courageous and to be bold. And what are you asking African Americans and allies to do? Now, it is a loaded question because we are sitting in a city where the majority of leaders at every level are Black folk. And so we're asking tough but necessary questions here. What are we asking ourselves and our allies to do specifically to show up? Alana, let me ask you to start for it.
Thank you. So what are we asking of ourselves as Black leaders, whether we be elected, appointed, or in the community? I want to point out some really courageous work that a sister friend of mine did in the 16th Judicial District, Judge Lorie Landry. I know she's on this call and she would be really upset that I am calling her out, but her work is demonstrative of the kind of leadership and courage and bravery that we have to exhibit when we are asked to be arbiters of justice. When you see a pattern and practice of discrimination that comes before you in your judicial capacity, you have a choice to make. And as a Black woman or as a Black man, your choice is not purely to look at the law as a document or a set of rules that are blind and sanitized. Your responsibility is to look at our history and understand structural racism and understand that the cases that are being brought before you and whom they're being brought by is a direct reflection of the racism and inequality that our system is basically founded on. And so she really looked and pushed back against this system. And so we really have to stand in opposition, in defiant opposition of racism as it comes to us, wherever we sit, whether it be behind a bench or whether it be in a boardroom or whether it be in the courtroom or wherever you are standing. And so what I want to say about what the ACLU is doing specifically is we have an initiative called the Justice Lab, putting racist policing on trial. And the reason why we are doing that is because, as an organizer said, when your skin is a weapon, you are never unarmed. And so we come to these cases before the court with a distinct disadvantage. And how do we rectify that disadvantage? We must work through litigation, advocacy, and community engagement, dismantle the system of oppression that we know to be racism that is embedded in our criminal legal system. We do that by changing conduct, changing culture, and changing the jurisprudential doctrines that create immunity for behavior like murder. And that jurisprudential doctrine of qualified immunity is something that we are going to be striking at the heart of in order to dismantle that. But we need partnership from judges. We are calling on partnership from big law firms that have traditionally had their core values centered in other places other than community. That's going to require lots of work between allies as well. So in big law, we're looking to allies and Black folks. We're looking to strong judges and people who are courageous, that when we bring these cases, they don't just say, we don't need to take another look because of qualified immunity. We need them to be brave and courageous, and we need to be standing in defiant opposition to a system that we know for too long has broken Black bodies, brown bodies, with ropes, knees, guns, and everything else.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Norris.
Well, that's a tough act to follow right there.
No, she's
But,
following.
what I
You
say,
got it, big bro, you got it.
No, two things. One, when you ask about what folks who look like us in positions of power can do. One of the things I was kind of like, I woke up today and saw the paper where the city under Mayor Cantrell is saying that the investment and expansion of this jail is a waste of taxpayer dollars. It takes courage to say that.
That's right.
You know, because you're talking about an institution that has really been built on the backs of folks who can least afford to subsidize it. So that's the first step in the right direction. And then I think the biggest thing, more than anything, that kind of like brightened my month really, was this letter from Chief Justice Johnson when she is making this call to judges and legislators and powers that be about how we look at this. We didn't get here by incident. You know, this was something systemic. And one of the things that people say all the time is that you have to acknowledge that there was wrong before we can move forward. That letter talks about that wrong about silence being tacit approval. You know, I remember years ago always reading her dissenting opinions in all these cases where she would be the long voice, always speaking out for justice. And then when I actually got a chance to meet her 20 like years later, and I mentioned that to her, and she said, well, I was told that one day that voice of dissent may wind up in the majority. And today she's in a position where she hasn't forgot being the lone wolf, but she is actually using that heavy robe that she's wearing, kind of like to set the tempo. And I'm just hopeful that everybody in the judiciary follows suit. We don't need 9 people out of Washington, D.C. to regulate how we behave here in the state of Louisiana. We got 7 people here that can kind of like set the record straight and kind of like bring, it's like what Mike was saying earlier about the non-unanimous jury verdict. You can kind of like make people whole in the sense of realizing the back, why this law was actually crafted, who it actually impacted, and just being honest and truthful. Because one thing that the law always says, that if there's not a law in place, you can fashion a remedy. You can always fashion a remedy for what needs to happen. And so I'm just hopeful that all of our folks, you know, those who are elected, those who just willpower, that's not elected official, kind of like see this moment, and we always kid ourselves about what we gonna tell our daughter. She said, "Daddy or Mama, where was you when all it was going on?" I hope everybody's kind of like looking in the mirror right now and really reflecting about that conversation about having with their children, grandchildren, about where they were at in this moment, because this moment is like no other moment in our lifetime. We won't be able to capture this again. And so we have to take full advantage of this moment to try to get everything that needs to get done. Everything we thought about was wrong. We need to kind of put it on the table and say we need to fix it. And if somebody say, well, why? We actually have a reason why. Because, you know, in organizing, one of the things that we look at first, we highlight what the crisis is. We kind of like shift the frame, but we offer a solution. So the biggest thing is while we're having these conversations, let's not just start talking. Let's have these solutions in place. So when somebody say, okay, we got the green light to move, we ready to go to work right then and there.
Thank you, Norris. I want to highlight as I move to Mike, you talk about this, you know, James Baldwin talks about the doing of the impossible back when these discussions were being held back in the 60s. And so it's interesting how consistent this call for courage is that I'm hearing from you both. Back in 2010, when we started this work with the jail size task force, one of the things that you and Judge Calvin Johnson said is, you know, all these systems are connected. And so while we were talking about jail, we were actually talking about police in that context. Back then, we were arresting some 60,000 people a year. Now we're down to 20,000 or so, give or take. And we knew this would happen. Crime has not gone up, even with a significant reduction in interactions that have also helped to keep communities safer. We just want to be reminded that we've done great and amazing things already as a way of giving us energy to do great and amazing things going forward. Mike, tell me, as we try to close this conversation, what are you asking African American leadership in particular, and also our allies, to do from the perspective of your platform?
I'm asking that we have real dialogue. And I'm asking all brothers and sisters that are in positions of power, authority, that sit at these tables, that come with a sole objective in mind. You know, I have to keep it real for a moment, Flozell, because I say all the time, if you have 4 or 5 Black people in the room, 4 have hidden agendas. We have to leave those hidden agendas at the door. We have to have a singleness of purpose, and we have to understand that generation hinges upon us being able to make the right decision. Someone said today, any day is a good day to do the right thing. If you look at the agendas, that are pushed, Hispanics have their agenda, the Asians have their agenda, you know, white folk have their agenda. We should have our agenda where all generations understand where we're going. Yeah. We start that way, and somehow it gets watered down, and nobody knows where we're going. We do more mark timing, standing in place, moving, than we do moving forward. This is an opportunity that I have never seen in my lifetime, and I don't mind telling people I'm 55. My son said I probably looks like I'm 45. My wife said I dance like I'm 25. But we have to know and understand the tenor of the environment right now. For us to get something done, we have to utilize this time now. That means all hands on deck. That means that the time that we normally spend talking about 4 or 5 different things, we talk about one. And Flozell, you're exactly right when you talk about the police, city prosecutor, the district attorney, the judges, and probation or parole. They're all tied in together. We can't talk about one and not talk about the rest of the strings, because all of them tie us down and rip us of our dignity, rip us of our families, of our fortunes, and of our future. So we just can't talk about getting rid of the police, those that are dirty. We don't talk about getting rid of these low-down district attorneys, low-down judges, and low-down probation parole people. But if we're in a position of authority, we have the opportunity. And if it means doing what's right and not being, and your colleagues not take you to the lunch, so be it. You should be able to sleep at night knowing that you did the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. As we move to Antonio, I'm reminded that we have a tremendous history of civil rights in this community, the likes of AP2O and many, many, many others who in their day were just like us on this call, and folks in community, folks who sat in different parts of community, but who showed up to do historic things. And what I just heard Mike say is this is a once in a lifetime opportunity, echoing what Norris and others have said. Antonio, close this out for us. We saved the best for last. As I said before, I believe in young leadership. You guys tend to be the bravest, the most courageous, and pushing us all forward. And in particular, tell me, from what you've been hearing and the work that you've been doing, what should we be doing, man? What's the opportunity for us to really not lose this moment? And what are the particular things that we get to invest in so that we can see the kind of change that you all want us to have?
Yeah, so I'll say the first thing is when we talk about holding African American leaders, when we talk about what African American leaders could do, my saying is a little bit more intangible. I think first of all, centering the people, you'll always do what you need to do. Like everything sounds good, but if your intentions are not pure, you're always going to do something that'll do more harm than good. When we talk about the moment, and brother Mike just was talking about it, Generations United, man, that's what's on our shirts. Generations United, the village is here. We gotta eliminate the generational gap if we want to seize the moment. We have to be on the same page. We have to all be on the same page. We have to attack that. And let's make sure when we talk about investments, man, let's make sure we invest in peace builders instead of SROs. Let's make sure we have folks who are equipped to deal with people with mental illnesses, trauma-informed counselors, man. Like these are the things that I feel like these are necessities, and you know it's almost like being deprived of your human rights. That we have to ask for these things. So for us, we're fighting for our liberation, and so for us, man, we're asking for folks to invest in what you would want to invest in for your own child. You know what I'm saying? So Generations United, man, keep the intent pure, keep the people centered, and we good to go. We're going to Wakanda after that.
Absolutely. So I want to just thank the panelists. I want to briefly acknowledge that we heard some specific ideas around no police in schools. We heard specific ideas about the important role of the judiciary in providing leadership in this case, as has been historically the case. Other parts of the so-called law enforcement or criminal justice system, we heard ideas about investing in mental health, investing in education, investing in human services and other things that actually build up and expand our humanity. And just by way of leadership and responsibility, I want to make sure that we acknowledge what we haven't had a chance to, and that is that this movement, as has always been the case, is an intersectional one. Our neighbors and our friends in the LGBTQ community, particularly Black, trans, and queer women, have been lifting up and moving this work. I am learning more, as are others. And if we can come together, we have a history of winning. I appreciate the panelists for bringing us through this leadership conversation. And I appreciate the Urban League for including me and all of us in this opportunity to act.
Thank you so much to the wonderful, spectacular Mr. Flozell Daniels and that amazing, amazing panel discussion. We are going to keep this train moving. We're ready for panel 2, another group of spectacular leaders who are going to take this issue of police reform on, and it will be moderated by the one and only Takima Robinson, who is the founder and CEO of Converge Consulting. Takima?
Hello, how are you all? Can you hear me? All right. Thank you so much, Judy, for having me. I'm excited just to be here amongst family to have this conversation. Knowing that we're going to be followed by a panel of mayors, we are going to move through our conversation, really building on what we just heard. So I want to first introduce our amazing panelists who are going to continue the conversation and bring us some very specific reforms and also really help us sharpen the ask. So first I have Karen K.G. Marshall, the Executive Director of Rethink. I'm also joined by Terry Landry, Junior Policy Director with the Southern Poverty Law Center, Ashley Shelton, Executive Director of the Power Coalition for Equity and Justice, Adam Eugene, Black Student Union, University of Louisiana at Lafayette, and last but not least, Cedric White of NoCap, Project Director of Friends and Families of Louisiana's Incarcerated Children. Thank you all for joining us this evening. So I want to jump right in so we can use this time wisely. I want to really pick up where this last panel ended. We need specific reforms. You heard the Congressman earlier talk about a 13-point plan laid out in the George Floyd Justice Policy Policing Act. And I really want to hear from you. What are you all hearing from your constituents? What are communities that you work in? And what are you hearing from everyday people about what they want to see and what they are advocating for? I'm going to start with you, Karen, and ask Ashley to follow up to your comments.
Thank you. It's great to be a part of this. Can y'all hear me? We're good? All right. So, I mean, we work specifically with Black young people in New Orleans, talk to young people and their families consistently about this. And we've heard, without a doubt, with no equivocation, that folks want abolition. So what comes with that? Young people have a list of demands, but what comes with that is some things that were said, ending qualified immunity. One thing that is definitely on a list of demands that we hear from young people is like repealing the Blue Lives Matter law. That was a racist reaction to the uprising 2014 and 2016 that paved the way to the uprising now. Similar to what Antonio spoke about with Black Men Rising, we want to end any kind of use of police in schools, school resource officers, and any kind of policing apparatus to control and discipline Black and brown young people. We want an end of cash bail and wealth and profit-based detention. End of all criminalization of being poor and criminalization of poverty. And we do ultimately want to defund and abolish the police, abolishing ICE. We want to fund education, provide housing for housing insecure, pass a law to pay a living wage. Includes all of these things. As we're defunding, we actually have to enact policies that actually recognize the dignity inherent in every single person. So we want to move eventually to a universal base against them, fund comprehensive mental health service, have free healthcare for all. But these are some things that like folks that are organizing, Black young people that are organizing, folks that are like, out there regularly organizing out there, is like, they're not talking about like small little reforms. They're talking about complete abolishing and getting rid of the state force apparatus, getting rid of the police apparatus everywhere. So I want to give space for other folks. So
thank you, Kate. We will definitely continue where you left off, but we heard some new things from you that had to do with housing and living wage and universal basic income. Really some additional upstream interventions that we can, and investments we can make as opposed to investing in police. So I appreciate those additions. Ashley.
Yes, good afternoon. So happy to be here. Thankful to the Urban League and Judy, Reese, leadership for creating spaces for these kinds of conversations, because we are in a moment that I feel hopeful about, that I feel like we have to honor those folks that have lost their lives, because we haven't been able to open this issue, crack this issue wide open, and be able to address it. I think that we've been hearing about this across the state as a civic engagement that works statewide. We talk to voters all year long, all across the state, and we're hearing many of the same things. that we've got to have body cams for police, that, you know, like we need to replace riot gear with body cams, that we need to not only charge, but also convict officers when they, you know, like when they actually commit a crime, like murdering someone or working outside the parameters of their training. We're also hearing, you know, like about how do we just redefine this system? I mean, back in 2016 for the mayoral race in New Orleans, we talked about jobs as public safety. And so these narratives aren't new. I think the moment creates an opportunity for us to actually move a much more powerful conversation to policy action. And so when we talk about, you know, redefining public safety, we're talking about jobs and after school and mental health and many of the things that the formal panel talked about, but also too, what we've been hearing is to break down the system. And I think to the point that many folks have made, you know, is that it's not just the police, right? Like that it is also our judiciary. You know, we've got several judges on the ticket in July for July 11th election for both New Orleans and Baton Rouge. You know, the one in the race in New Orleans, they're going to be looking at mortgages and not mortgages, but evictions and other things that, you know, in the midst of this pandemic, we're going to see a whole lot more of. And so just thinking about how all these different issues converge upon each other, but also too, we're, you know, like so much around the cash bail, like ending this debtor's prison piece, you know, like stop locking people into poverty and criminalization through fines and fees. We need to build out an ability to pay framework so that we don't create, you know, we don't create further criminalization. Also too, you know, like we talked a lot about, you know, we've heard a lot about too, about the DA's races that are coming up in the fall. You know, all, you know, 63, well, there's 64 parishes, but there's 63 DAs that are going to be on the ballot across the state of Louisiana. And I think in particular, you know, like you know, as the most incarcerated place in the world, New Orleans has an opportunity to say back to the rest of the world, we won't stand for that title, that we demand leadership that isn't corrupt, that we demand leadership that that cares about Black and brown bodies, that we demand leadership that is going to actually move our communities forward and not, you know, take away people's quality of life. And so those are, you know, like some of the things that we've been hearing, you know, and we've just been really doing, you know, doing our part around trying to, you know, help people understand that like there are many roles that we all are going to have to play in this movement in order to actually see real change. And in addition to protesting and making sure that our voices are heard, we've got to take the census, which is the first part of representation that we hold, you know, like from the state's federal standard. But I mean, I think also too, this opportunity to really vote in leadership that's going to use their discretion to make good decisions about giving people their lives back, but then also to, you know, folks that are willing to do the work of, you know, abolition, defunding the police, and ultimately the liberation of Black and brown bodies.
Thank you, Ashley. I was struck by a comment Charles Blow made last week on Oprah special, which was like, if, you know, if our bodies are the cost, if our life is the cost, then we need to ask for it all in this moment. Terry, I want to come to you next and really give you the same question, pose the same question to you. What are some of the specific reforms you are asking for in this moment? What are you advocating for?
Well, first, let me say good evening to everyone, and thank you to Judy and the Urban League for reaching out and allowing me to participate with these great intellectuals that we have on this panel and as part of the webinar as a whole. So I definitely appreciate it. I think before we can even start talking about specific reform, we have to ask police to do what they claim their motto is, and they claim their motto to be protect and serve. Yet now they're just going out and they're persecuting and slaughtering, right? So instead of need you to protect and serve, not persecute and slaughter our people like we aren't human, because how can you reform inhumanity and indecency? Mr. Brooks in Atlanta should be alive today. You saw him on video pleading with an officer. He tried to do the right thing, telling him he was parked because he wasn't sure he could drive, telling him he was planning a birthday party for his daughter. And yet seconds later, he's shot in the back as he tried to flee. Those things have to change before we can even start talking about specific policies and reforms that has to happen. The police have to live up to what they claim their motto to be. And then once they are challenged and actually start doing that, we can start looking at the 13 points that Congressman Richmond made that Ashley just talked about a few minutes ago. And you know, I think another important one that hasn't been mentioned that was mentioned by the Congressman is the elimination of the no-knock warrant. I mean, you look at Breonna Taylor would be alive today. The gentleman in Port Allen would be alive. Imagine being in your home and someone just barges in, because that's what no-knock warrants allow. They allow police to just basically knock down your door without giving the reason or purpose of why they're there. And oftentimes in any type of warrant, especially no-knock warrants, they have the information wrong, which is what happened in Breonna Taylor's deal. It was the wrong apartment. And unfortunately, and it's also a protection for the police, because when we have people that are armed, like we do across the nation, if you just arbitrarily break down into their homes, there's going to be some repercussions. And that's what happens. And that's also a safety measure for police officers. So until we can stop doing those things, I mean, that's a huge deal. And then also we need to know what is going on in these communities with these police officers, because last year we were fortunate to pass a data collection bill, which only created a task force, but that's what we're looking at, studying what is being reported by these officers, how is it being reported, where's the uniformity in that, and also looking at what the racial profiling policies of each law enforcement office across the state is happening. So so right now we don't know when use of force is being used, who it's being used against, and for what reasons. And until we can start determining those issues and having it made known to the public, then we're going to stay in the same spot. And so I think those are some of the things. Obviously, everybody else has highlighted so much other, but those are two key issues I'd like to see happen immediately. But like I said, the first one would be just got to start doing the protecting and serving.
Thank you, Terry, and thank you for adding to the list of sort of specific reforms folks have started compiling. I want to come to you next, Adam. You are the president of the Black Student Union. What are your members, students that you represent asking for?
Hello, thank you for having me here. Just a point of clarity, my position for the Black Student Union is Director of Events. I'm the president of the National Pan-Hellenic Council of the Divine Nine Greek organizations here on campus, and a member of the Zeta Xi chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. Our members here on campus, the constituents that we represent, they are in pain, they are tired. They are hurting from years and years of systemic racism that now breeds into their everyday life. Trauma that they have to live through every day, wondering if they're going to make it to the next day. They sleep at night, having trouble because of that trauma. A lot of the points that we want to see implemented were included in Senator Richmond's bill. The standard of force across the board. There needs to be a standard on how police use excessive force, and if it is even necessary to begin with. That's something that needs to be regulated. Independent investigations into police misconduct, data from police departments that's made transparent to the public. If we're able to elect our sheriffs and our state attorney generals, then this type of information needs to be available to the public so we can have accountability for our elected officials. We need to be able to see what's going on, the numbers, and be able to judge for ourselves if these are the people that we want in positions of making and enforcing our laws. The people we're advocating for here on campus, they want a future that's invested in our education. We don't want to have to simply fight for funding. We don't want to have to fight to be educated. We don't have to want to fight in order to be heard and to be recognized as human beings. It should be something that's instilled and promised with the same creed that everyone else follows in this country: liberty and justice for all. To take a step back a little bit and to go more for the root of this problem, and something that we all need to start to push for more and more, is looking into the 13th Amendment. This clause, which states, for anyone who doesn't know it verbatim, neither slavery nor involuntary service, except as punishment for crime, whereas the party shall have been convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Within this statement, there is a clause that legalizes slavery for the criminal justice system. To charge someone as a criminal, you allow them to become a slave again. This is the clause that supposedly ended slavery in America, but yet in its context, and yet as we see today with protests in the street, it is something that is clearly still here today. This must be the generation that looks into this and ends slavery in America in all shapes and forms once and for all. The criminal justice system, the things we're fighting to overdo today, are a root from this. It cannot be taken serious. This has to be taken serious. This cannot be taken lightly. This is the root of the systematic racism that exists within this country, and we must overturn it. We must take that clause out. Otherwise, the institutions that are designed to protect and serve the people will continue to be used to oppress, separate, and dehumanize us.
Thank you very much. I think it's very important that you raised that piece that had not been mentioned thus far, that there is some work to be done in that foundational document. Last but not least, I want to ask Cedric, who works with Friends and Families of Louisiana's Incarcerated Children. Cedric, are you there?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes, you guys hear me?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. And so I wanted to have you weigh in on this question as well, especially with respect to the constituents, the folks who represent young people and families who have been maimed by the criminal legal system. Can you talk about some of the specific reforms that you would like to see?
First of all, I would like to greet everybody by saying peace. Peace education corrects errors or progress every time errors is thought to be enlightenment. So we work with young people, and we work really and hard toward juvenile justice reform and knock down that school pipeline. So one of the things they be removing the actual police officers out of the schools. That would be number one. And one of our national partners, Dignity in Schools, they have a program called Counselors, Not Cops, and we really would like something to kind of like take on that philosophy, talking about defunding, really talk about divesting and then some of that stuff, kind of take it away from the militarization of the police, reinvest those funds into some alternate solution on the de-escalation training, maybe some cultural sensitivity. I think that police, you know, on the
Cedric, I think we're having some trouble hearing you. Okay, we're going to work on Cedric's audio, and I'm going to continue our conversation, and we're going to try and get him back into the conversation before we close out. KG, I want to come back to you with sort of the final question, and I'm going to ask everyone to start queuing up your answer to this question. This really is, what do we need to do? How do we need to show up, both as African Americans, as Black folks, but also what do we need our allies to do? The last panel spoke a lot to how we need Black elected officials to show up. In addition to Black elected officials, how do we need to show up as Black folks in this moment? And what do we need to ask our allies to do? How do we need to ask them to show up for us as well? KG, give us a second. You may be muted.
Is this better?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
I think we need to look to history to understand the context behind the answer to that question. Like number one, the reason for police, particularly in the U.S. Somebody said it earlier, but it was to violently control Black bodies in the United States. It's a slave patrol, and it's the state forces in a capitalist system in the United States that police are really there to protect and serve the interests of profit and money. And also we need to look at what's happened at different points of rebellion, of uprising, and also of progress in the history of the United States. And that is to say that often we get an increase of violent repression. And then also what we get is some kind of concession to keep us happy with things that are not necessarily transformative, that don't actually change systems, and that don't change outcomes for more like the bottom 3/4 of folks in terms of class in society, whether it's poor Black folks, poor brown folks, LGBTQ, but those folks who exist on the lower level of the working class don't necessarily see much change. So I think like what I'm calling for from those in the African American community, those in the Black community, those who are actually for real liberation for all, what I'm calling for is for people to not stop, for folks to not accept any kind of renegotiation, for folks not to accept any kind of weak concession that don't lead to any kind of systemic change. We have an opportunity right now. What we see is uprisings in every single state in the country. And in 18 countries across the globe, because this kind of state violence that people are protesting, this is a global force. This includes, like I said before, police, it's ICE, it's our military forces occupying spaces all over the globe, and it's strictly in to protect capital. So we actually need to keep going. We need to keep going to insist on a transformation of all systems. And then we also need some people that are willing to test alternatives. So if we're saying that we need to defund police and eventually get to a place where we're at a place of abolition, we need folks testing what it looks like to have police-free schools and police-free communities so that we're ready. If we're talking about holding a judicial system accountable and eventually getting to the place where we're not locking people up in cages, where we're not having punitive responses to actual social issues, then we need folks actually testing those alternatives and projects of self-determination. And what I would ask for from any ally, again, is to align themselves with those kinds of demands, with those kinds of programs, and that kind of organizing that's going to fundamentally transform the system that we're in and allows for the liberation of those who occupy the lowest rung, the lowest class. We understand that in a white supremacist system, what the US is, that freedom has always meant in a white supremacist system, the freedom to restrict and the freedom from restriction. And we know that as we're trying to dismantle all of that, we have a different definition of freedom. That means if those who occupy the lowest levels of the working class, the permanent underclass, are allowed to be free, then everyone will be free. And we need to push until that happens.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Ashley.
I know, like they said it all. Beautiful said, KG. I think, the few things that I would add to many of the things that she listed is, like that, I think to Adam's point around data, like we need accountable, police officers. So I'm going to give you guys a number. In the state of Louisiana, we spend $1.4 billion on the police and criminal legal system in this state. So in one of the poorest states in the country, we spend $1.4 billion running this system. And when I think about what I could do with 10% of that, what I could do with 25% of that, what I could do with 30% of that, when I look at what I'm trying to tackle in our communities, and whether that be food insecurity, housing insecurity, or any of these other things, like there is real work to be done about reprioritizing how we spend our dollars. And so that accountability, though, also speaks to, my issue with like, who is safe? And I think that what we know as people of color, Black, Latinx, Asian Pacific Islander, and Native American is that I'm not safe. I mean, I'm at a position right now in my life where I don't feel like I can call the police. I don't even know under what circumstance I would call the police. And I think that like that is a really scary thing to confront. And I think that that's also something that our allies that are struggling to understand and how to meet us where meet us in this moment. I think that like acknowledging the trauma that comes with all of the realities, whether it's, my 17-year-old, 200-pound, 6'3" son walking out the door every day and worrying about what's going to happen to him, or whether it's, or whether it's going to bed at night and knowing that if something were to happen, can I call the police? And so I think that accountability, that data, that transparency, that's the other problem that I have, is that we're spending millions, billions of dollars. And what's the effectiveness? I mean, Baton Rouge is the fifth worst per capita for murder in the nation. Shreveport is the 8th worst in the nation. New Orleans is 18th. I mean, working our way down the list. And so, but I mean, I think that when we talk about like who's safe, right? I mean, I think that we've got to address that. I think another piece that comes up for me too is leadership and courage. I mean, we've been doing a lot of work around the state to, really connect people back to their voice and their vote. And I think that what we hear time and time again is that it doesn't matter. They don't listen. Well, I think that what's true for every advocate that's been on the previous panel and this current panel is that I'm accountable to everybody that I talk to. I bring them with me into meetings. I bring them with me into these discussions. And so when it's like, like Ashley, pipe down, Ashley, like we feel like you're not working with us. And it's like, I'm not accountable to you. I'm accountable to Miss Jones and Mr. Smith and all these folks in community that are holding me accountable for, you said you would stand with me and you would speak for me, and you would bring me to the table. Well, then I can't compromise on those commitments that I've made to them. And so I think for me, when I look at our elected body and when I think about these elections that are coming up, we need to make sure that we do the work of putting leaders in place that are going to have the courage to do what the people say. And so I think that people-centered leadership, the people closest to the problem are closest to the solution. One of Norris's famous sayings, I think it's never been more true. And I think that we keep trying to solve problems outside of community and it's not gonna work. And so for me, like leadership and courage is absolutely necessary. And I think the final point I'd make was to KG's point about too, like we can't settle for the crumbs any longer. They can't throw one or two policy reforms at us and say, you should be happy now. No, I won't be happy until I can sleep at night.
Interrupt you only because we have our mayors waiting and the next panel, but I want to make sure Terry, Adam, and Cedric have an opportunity to answer the question. If you all don't mind giving me a very quick 30-second response to this question, what do we need? How do we need Black folks to show up, and how do we need our allies to show up? Terry, can you go first?
Well, I think Ashley did a great job of covering what we need African Americans to do: continue to protest, continue to be out there. And then we have a large group of civil rights organizations right here in Louisiana to go to reach out to, and we want to collectively do work together. I think that makes a huge impact. To our allies, or people who claim to be our allies, I think Martin Luther King Jr. said it best. In the end, it's not the words of our enemies that we'll remember, it's the silence of our friends, right? So you can't just sit back and put up these, social media tags, hashtags, and making these comments on the internet are all fine and cute, but put your money, where your mouth is. Louisiana houses multi-million-dollar corporations across the state, and they're not owned by Black folks most of the times. So these people need to make a huge commitment in the right way, not just by putting out statements or things that look good for public opinion.
Commitment from our allies. Adam, what are we asking for?
It's important for us as a community to stand together. We have to make our voice heard, and we cannot stay silent. We have to continue to raise our voices. The people that are in position right now to make the change are in office because we put them there. We voted them in, and we gave them power through us. We have to continue to remind them that we, the people, gave you that power to uphold our requests. We are not asking for change. We are demanding change. This is not a time that the country needs to stand and be comfortable. This is the time that you need to feel the vibrations of change. because tomorrow will depend on it.
Thank you. Cedric, can you please close us out?
Yes, actually, I think as a parent and as someone who works for parents, implementing the police free schools, that's number one. And two, just need
I'm sorry, I don't believe Cedric's audio is working, but I do want to thank all of our panelists for sharing your insights with us this evening. And thank you all for the amazing work that you continue to do in our community. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Takima. That was an excellent job of moderating a conversation with true thought leaders. Thanks to every member of panel 2. We are now ready to move to the final panel of the evening, our discussion with 3 mayors in the state of Louisiana. I want to turn it over to the moderator of this panel, who is J. Brown Russell. She serves as the board chair of the Urban League of Louisiana. Jade?
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Thank you so much, Judy Reese Morse, for the introduction. And I have been listening to every panel before us, as well as the remarks from some of our leaders. And I must say, so much knowledge has been given on the subject of police reform. And I think we definitely have our work ahead of us. I am so honored to be introducing for the second time a panel of mayors who are doing the work in their respective jurisdictions. They joined us, if you all remember, in 2019 for the Urban League of Louisiana's Empowerment and Policy Conference. And we were glad to bring the mayors from across the state together to really talk about policy issues. But today, we're very excited about bringing them together yet again on the topic of police reform. And so I have the honor of introducing our panelists for this final session. The first is the mayor president of the city of Baton Rouge and East Baton Rouge Parish, Mayor President Sharon Weston Broome. We also have the mayor of the city of New Orleans, Mayor Latoya Cantrell. And lastly, we have the mayor of the city of Shreveport, Mayor Adrienne Perkins. Mayors, Mayor President, thank you for taking the time out of what we know are very, very, very busy schedules during these times. So thank you for being here with us. I also want to take this time just to thank you all for putting people first. I think, you all don't get enough credit. We've seen stories, we've seen you on the news media, on different channels. And every time that the 3 of you have been in front of the people, we're very, very clear that you're putting people first, and that cannot go without saying. The Urban League of Louisiana is an organization that focuses on empowering communities and changing lives. So we thank you for the work that you're doing. Earlier in one of the panels, Flozell Daniels, he talked about the call for courage and the courage and leadership. And I think you all definitely are not lacking in that area. But I do want to get started if we can. We only have a couple questions, but I know that those questions are going to take us far. So I will, I'm going to start in the order that we presented you all. So Mayor President Sharon Weston Broome, I'm going to start with you. What conversations on this issue and topic of police reform, what conversations have you had with your police chief? And once Mayor President Broome responds, I'll move on to Mayor Cantrell and Mayor Perkins on the same question. What conversations are you having with your police chiefs in these times? Mayor Broom, are you there?
Yes. Can you hear me now, Jade?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. I don't know what has happened with the video, but I better leave it alone right now and just keep going. But to answer your question, you know, I appointed my police chief almost a year after I was in office in 2018. And first, let me thank the Urban League for hosting this conversation. I've been listening to it as well, and it certainly has been a meaningful and insightful experience. My police chief and I have a very close relationship. And the conversations that we have been having, and I'm going to be very transparent, is that we have done a lot of the work around the conversations that we're hearing right now. As you probably know, we had an officer involved killing with Alton Sterling in 2016. I was running for mayor at that time, became mayor in 2017. And in my first week, maybe week and a half, I assembled a group of community leaders to talk about addressing issues and reform in our police department. And so the chief and I are having conversations about what we have done as it relates to reform and certainly where we're headed. I mean, we have, one of the first things we did was establish use of force in policy. We did de-escalation. We did fair and impartial policing and implicit training, bias training. I was talking with the mayor the other day, and she was like, I'm going to take a bold step, and I am going to outfit and equip my police officers with body cameras next week. Well, we did that back in 2017, and today our body cameras are so high tech. If an officer pulls his gun out, then it's going to activate anybody else's gun in the area. So we've got the body cameras, but nevertheless, we have not arrived. And that's what I want people to know. And that's part of the conversation that we're having, you know, today as it relates to strategies and tactics. I will tell you, Jade, and I don't want to be too long. I want to give my other colleagues some time. But for me and our chief, one of the conversations that we're having conversations around obstructions to advancing a 21st century police department, obstructions that are with some institutions. For us, you know, the Baton Rouge Police Union is often an obstruction to advancing reform. You know, there are entities, boards and commissions that are often an obstruction to reform. And so looking at those different entities is one of the conversations I have certainly been having, not only with my police chief, but with others, and continuing to work on our reporting system, making sure we're having comprehensive reporting at the Baton Rouge Police Department. And, you know, making sure that we're working on advancing a diverse police department. I will tell you, our last class graduation I went to of our cadets, and I wish I had the picture to show you, because a picture speaks 1,000 words. You know, the class was so diverse. It looked like the fabric of the Baton Rouge community. And certainly, after coming out from under, I want to say, a 39-year consent decree surrounding hiring practices in our police department, to see a class that diverse certainly, you know, was fulfilling for me. But the work continues. We've got to recruit and make sure that people from the community want to be a part of our of public safety, specifically our police department here. So I could go on, but I look forward to coming back and sharing some more after my colleagues.
Hello?
Jade, we can't hear you.
I'm sorry, can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I was talking away on mute. Mayor Cantrell, what kind of conversations are you having now, given these times with your chief?
Well, first of all, thank you, Urban League, to the Urban League family. And it's always good to be amongst my brother and sister mayor. So I appreciate the opportunity. Much like Mayor Broom, I hired my current police chief a little over a year ago. And what we have always talked about and remaining consistent in that is accountability, bottom line. Being able to meet our people really where they are, and ensuring that when we do so, that our citizens are being treated with respect and that all of our officers are following constitutional policing practices. We are in a consent decree in the city of New Orleans. We have been since 2013. And one of my top priorities has been to demonstrate that we have met in terms of compliance. We're getting there. And demonstrating the work that we have done. And we're proud of that. But we have, a ways to go. However, we've made tremendous progress. I asked my superintendent to continue on that path. NOPD has been on. Also, we have, no reason, not to embrace what we know, the policies that we know are needed and that make a difference. And we, again, have done just that. One example, even as it relates to, we no longer arrest anyone for municipal attachments in our city. No one with a traffic ticket in Orleans Parish is being arrested. NOPD, again, as it relates to increase the use of summons in lieu, of arrests. All of these are tied to constitutional policing practices that we have adopted and that we're living by every single day. And also with the most recent, the protests, and of course what we know, racism, systemic racism, how it's embedded in police departments around the country, and ensuring that, hey, we're no better. But with training and practices in place, we're definitely on the path to, and we are practicing constitutional policing. But accountability at the top of the list every step of the way. We see bad actors, we follow policy, and we act with haste.
Mayor Cantrell, thank you for those comments. Mayor Perkins, what about you? What kind of conversations are you having?
Anything to add?
Uh-oh.
Oh, they're going.
Let's see, now we
That's
can't.
the next question.
Okay, I think we may be having some technical difficulties with Mayor Perkins. We'll come back to him because I'm very interested in hearing his comments on the conversations that he's having with his police chief. But we'll come back to him. Let's see. Should we try him one more time, Mayor Perkins? Mayor Perkins, we may need you to exit out and come back into the webinar. So you may need to exit out and come back in. Let me move, Mayor Cantrell. I know we just, you just wrapped up your comments, but I want to come back to you because you hit on a lot of different, you hit on a lot of different things, but I want to come back to the conversation around what we're seeing as it relates to reform. Right. Mm-hmm. So we in our panels before, we heard from many folks from all kinds of walks of life, and everyone has their own opinion, and those opinions are varied.
Jay, can you hear me now?
I can.
Okay. Sorry about that. Sorry to interrupt.
So I hold on one second, Mayor Perkins. Let me just wrap up this other question because we're gonna come back to Mayor Cantrell. in just a second. But Mayor Cantrell, while you are, while Mayor Perkins is responding to the other question, I want you to give some thought to this concept of police reform, what it means, and to you individually as a mayor, and how you see that carrying out in your city. So let me jump back to Mayor Perkins really quickly. Mayor Perkins, if you can just chime in and let us know, Shreveport, what kind of conversations are you having with your police chief in Shreveport?
Gotcha. Yeah, quickly, I just want to thank the Urban League as well. It's always good to be on a call with my big sisters, and also good to see you again, Jade. Shreveport, I would say our conversations with my police chief kind of centers around two themes. I would say the first theme is letting my police chief know, hey, although I was primarily giving you oversight prior to the recent events, and I have a background in being a demonstrator. I was actually in Baton Rouge after the Alton Sterling shooting. I was in Ferguson, Missouri. I've been writing about police reform since 2016. I had an article in the New York Times. So I'm a tough boss with this, but he has an even greater challenge. Right now, it's about 200,000 sets of eyes that are watching over his office every day and holding him accountable as well. So not only does he have to, make sure that he's walking within the guidelines that I've put forth, but he has to be walking within the guidelines that the community is currently putting forth and calling for. So I make sure that he knows that challenge, and it's a big challenge. I appointed him the police chief last September, so he's somewhat new in the job, but also somewhat of an elephant in the room is that he's a white police chief in a predominantly African-American city. So he's doing all that he can to be an ally and understand the cries from the community and make sure that the whole community feels safe. The second theme that we talk about is it's an opportunity for them. Right now, they are calling for reform. A lot has to get done. So it's an opportunity for him to step up and just prove in a big way that despite skin color, that he can be the police chief over Shreveport. So those are the two big things that we are discussing quite a bit. And, he's done well thus far, but, we have a long road to go for improvements. Just like Mayor Broome said, a lot of the things that have come out in Obama's 8 Can't Wait campaign, we've done. But some of the things we haven't been able to do yet, like body cameras. When I came into the office, we had a negative $1.2 million deficit. So that we didn't have much money laying around to quickly purchase them. And my city council's tough. So fortunately, with the events that have taken place, everybody now has the will on city council to grant those appropriations. So we'll be arming all of our officers with body cameras and policies attached to those body cameras to genuinely hold them accountable. So we're working hard. Me and my police chief are probably talking more than we ever have. We're going to do so until I come out of office. I don't think there is no point in which we'll be able to say, okay, all is done. So we got a lot of work ahead of us, and like I said, it's an opportunity for us.
We earlier we had Congressman Richmond who came on and talked about the work that's happening at the federal level and all of the reform efforts there, and he gave a laundry list, I think 12 different things that are going into their reform package. When you think about reform, I think that it's such a huge concept. So what are you thinking about reform for your individual cities, right? Like, are you receptive to reform, or are you taking the position that you all have the structure, the policies in place for your respective cities, and other things need to be worked on? Just very interested in knowing and understanding your position as it relates to police reform. Mayor Cantrell?
Sure. Well, thank you again. Now, in the city of New Orleans and with our New Orleans Police Department, we absolutely embrace the need for reform. And we agree, when you look at the 8, they say 8 of 8, we agree that those changes can't wait. And that's exactly why we have not waited. We have them in place, and we've had them in place for some time. So whether, that is the banning of the chokeholds and the strangleholds, the duty to intervene, establishing the force of continuum. We do that. The de-escalation, EPIC, we're teaching that. Started in New Orleans, and we're teaching it across the country to other police departments. And that request has gone up in the past week and a half tremendously with the outreach given to Superintendent Ferguson. Banning shooting at moving vehicles. We had an issue with that under my administration, and we had to act swiftly, and we did so. That leads to, again, building the trust in the community and keeping that level of trust. But we've adopted all of the 8 can't wait. But in addition, the cameras in vehicles, all of the body worn cameras, all of these various tools we have adopted, and we will continue to always look internally at ways that we can improve. We had an issue with one of our, out of multiple protests that we managed, and we look at what happened across the United States, I'm very pleased at the way that the New Orleans Police Department managed. We did have one incident, where protesters crossed the line, and we had tear gas as well as rubber bullets that were utilized. And so we're looking at ways, non-lethal force, the use of, in the future, but always willing to look internally, but at the same time, very grounded in the reforms that we have put in place and wanting to ensure that we continue to make progress in this city. And also with the investment, when we talk about defund police, well, we are making those investments in people. The first city to invest in early childhood education under my administration, the first to create a mayor's office of youth and families, streamlining assets or resources going to youth, going directly into families, whether that's also domestic violence, jobs for youth, investing heavily in mental health and behavioral health services, licensed clinical social workers, not only within the New Orleans Police Department, but at libraries, at Nord centers, all of these things. There's so much more to be done, but we have started the work, and I'm committed to it. My chief is as well.
Mayor Cantrell, to follow up on that, are there policies that you haven't yet adopted that you want to see happen as it relates to police reform?
So all of the reforms that are being recommended, we really have done in our city. What I do want to take a closer look at, as I've listened to the panelists, one, when they talked about what we do, crisis intervention training in terms of being able to manage in terms of folks suffering from mental illness. There was a recommendation that police not respond to that. Well, there's a law there as well that we need to look at, which requires a police escort, but we need to look at that. And that's one thing that I'm committed to doing, in addition to continuing to listen and make some changes. I heard also about the resource officers in schools. So I'm committed to working with our education community about how we can better serve our young people, our families, our schools without having police officers present. Committed to that as well. And it's not limited to that.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Mayor Broom, what about you? How do you feel about reform, and what does it look like for you?
Well, as I said, Jade, and my comments are almost ditto to my sister mayor. We've checked that list off of the 8 can't wait, and as I said earlier, there's always need for improvement. I will tell you that certainly as we look at our department, I believe that the more that we can elevate and improve our community policing, which we've certainly done a great job there, that it in essence will help us as a community certainly close that gap that is, we were closing the gap. Now with what has happened to George Floyd, what has happened in Atlanta, it's like the gap is opening back up. We were making tremendous progress. Now, I will tell you, we still, and I am very thankful, we have had peaceful protests. We've had people express themselves. I've met with protesters. I've heard their concerns. And as I said, many of the concerns that I heard have been already addressed in our police reform. But you know, there's something that I heard on one of the other panels, and that is that all of us in elected office, we have to be accountable. And I believe that is what I am hearing from a lot of the people who are involved in the conversations these days. I think it's also vitally important that people understand the responsibilities of their elected officials, that they understand what's going on, not only in city government and at City Hall, but what's going on down at the state capitol as laws are being passed that impact not only certain communities, but the entire state, especially as it relates to law enforcement. You know, somebody reached out to me the other day about a law, and I think they thought I had something to do with it. You know, mayors, everything falls in the laps of mayors at the end of the day, often. And so somebody reached out to me and they said they were talking about a bill where it was now a crime to throw water on a police officer. And I had to explain that took place down at the state legislature. And so what, you know, who are you talking to down there at the Capitol? Or how did your state representative vote on that? How did your state senator? So during all of this discussions that we're having, I think it's also an opportunity for us as elected officials, as nonprofit entities, the Urban League, others, to elevate awareness in terms of advocacy. And I think that's what's emerging as well. But I am very glad that we're on, I believe, a trajectory of reform in our police department. We did something, I want to say it was now either last year, year before last, it was in 2018, where we were able to pass a tax to build a mental health center here in Baton Rouge. And so I believe that our budgets are moral documents and that they represent our priorities as a city and as a parish. And so I look at my budget as a moral document, and the initiatives that I propose, I believe coincide with my vision to have a community where social services are not at a deficit, where mental health issues, services are not at a deficit, where we, even though we don't have really the jurisdiction, but we certainly advocate, as I heard Mayor Cantrell said, over early childhood development, you know, with programs that we have like Cradle to K. And so it's important that people look at our entire budget and see what's going on as we have this conversation as well.
You raised such a good point on the back end of your comments, and earlier panelists pointed out $1.4 billion is spent on the justice system in Louisiana. So we've got to do, and to your point, everything seems to fall in the laps of mayors, but there's some work that we need to do on a state level as it relates to exactly what you're talking about. Where are our dollars going and what are we investing in, right? We have to invest in people. We have to invest in early childhood, all of those things. So you make such a great point. I don't want to leave Mayor Perkins out of this conversation around reform. What are you thinking about reform? How do you see it? How do you feel about it? What does it look like in Shreveport?
It's okay. I'm being treated like the little brother here, for real. No, I already talked a little bit about my background as an activist prior to even being an elected official. So I realized early in office, though, you know, whatever my will and whatever my interests are, it pales in comparison when the citizens come together. So I have been not only pushing forward police reform from our knowledge, but we've been hosting faith leaders. We've been meeting with all the activists that have been and organizers that have been putting forth demonstrations in our city. We've been meeting with former police officers, and we have been doing everything we can to listen. And that was extremely important. So that no stone goes unturned when it comes to reform for our police for our police department. But going forward from that, Mayor Cantrell kind of hit on it. It's been an educational process. When I tell people, hey, I need you to continue to protest, to continue to demonstrate peaceful protest and get into the streets and push the narrative, I don't mean that's not just rhetoric. I really need them to do that, because no matter, even if I come up with a perfect solution at City Hall and we get the reform perfectly, it doesn't mean anything if there are state laws, if there are civil service boards that are obstructing what we're trying to accomplish, if there are federal laws that obstruct what we're trying to accomplish. So what I've been doing mostly when I've been meeting with these groups, and it's surprising to me, I've become somewhat of a teacher to talk about how the system is completely intertwined. Another thing that I did in my past, I worked on Governor Edwards' policy team when they were putting out the criminal justice reform bill. So I was doing a lot of research on post-training, police officer standardization training. We talk about reform in how we train our officers, and including de-escalation training and training on how to deal with citizens that are mentally ill. But that baseline for training is set at the state level, that post-training. So we can do a lot at the city level, but it would be helpful if the state changed some of those standards as well. So we are like going forth, we have to reform, and we are going to do everything we can at the city level. But I fear that we will fall short if there isn't a very strong education piece to everyone that's pushing change right now. And you push on City Hall as hard as you can, because we're the bright, shiny object. We're always out in front of the community, but you fail to talk to your city council members who do appropriations, by the way, for things like body cameras, or do appropriations for things like the police department when you talk about defunding. If you fail to talk to your state legislators that do appropriations for our criminal justice reform system, or if you fail to talk to your federal legislators, we can all fall short. So I genuinely am standing right beside my citizens as we reform our police department and the other systems around us that contribute to this systemic racism that is too prevalent in our country. And I'm going to continue to do that, but it's genuinely going to take a concerted effort across the board.
Thank you. Listen, y'all know I could sit here and talk to y'all all night, but they're telling me that we're running out of time, and so I'm going to give each of you the opportunity to make closing remarks. But in those closing remarks, I want to ask you to do one thing. I want actually two things, but I want you to tell us what we need to be doing. Right? A lot of times we're asking you what you are going to do. What do we need to be doing individually as organizations like the Urban League, and others? We had panelists from other think tanks and organizations. What should we collectively be doing? I want you to make sure you address that. And then the second thing, personal privilege. I have a 14-year-old who I thought was oblivious to the things that are happening in our world, and learned that she wasn't, right? What do you tell young people? Like, what should we all collectively be doing, regardless of age, to make sure that we see the change that we can all agree needs to happen? I'll let you guys have your closing remarks. Mayor Cantrell?
Okay, Jay, thank you all. Again, when you talked about your daughter 14, and I have a 12-year-old, and last Friday I had protesters on my front lawn asking me things, or for things that are not under my authority, and much like my colleagues, my brother and sister mayor alluded to. But what I do recognize is that we need to do more educating people about what is actually being done, what is not being done, but also where they need to focus that energy to bring about the changes that they want to see. After that protest, I learned that my daughter was terrified. Like, she was literally terrified, and for me, I'm like, oh, I'm good with it. But after the fact, she wasn't good with it, and looking for crime, cameras in the neighborhood, and trying to bring her to some level of peace. But it's all education. And even one of our panelists mentioned here today that New Orleans is the incarceration capital of the world. No, we're not. You know, so it's about understanding what you're saying and making sure that it's facts, because people repeat. Sometimes they repeat the facts, and sometimes they repeat misinformation that breeds misinformation, and it takes us off of the focus and actually from providing and getting to the changes that we want to see. Now, you know, with that 824 population, a maximum of about 850 in terms of our prison population is a demonstration to how well we are doing, and we'll move in that direction. And also, as it relates to my guy, Norris, who mentioned the defunding of the jail, you know, which we've been working on this long time, and having to call for, no, I don't want to spend more millions to fix a need, which is mental health. We can provide those services, but at a lower cost if we just do the right thing. So it's about education and advocacy, but in ways that we can teach our people how best to advocate or work with and listen to one another, and not talk over one another.
Mayor Cantrell, thank you so much for taking time out. Again, we know your schedule is busy. Mayor Broom, I'll let you have your closing comments, and Mayor Perkins, I'm gonna let you close out today.
Okay.
Well, I'll be brief. I just want to thank the Urban League of Louisiana once again for affording us this platform to share with the public. I will say, and I think you'll see a common thread among our conversation in closing here, is that we have to educate to elevate. And so if we're going to be effective, if we're going to have change agents, if we're going to see transformation, reformation, all of the above, then we have to make sure that our advocates are educated. And that's one of the things that I believe organizations like the Urban League, and I know you all do that on a large basis, but we can't let up, because one of the things that we're up against is a lot of misinformation that is promulgated on a social media platform. And so that's why I say we need more voices of truth that people respect, to continue to be out there to speak the truth. For my grandchildren, you know, they are certainly in tune to what's going on right now. I will tell you that my 16-year-old granddaughter participated in the first peaceful protest, which, by the way, was led by high schoolers in our community. But what struck me to know, and we have conversations all the time of her connectedness to what was going on, is that I just happened to go over to one of her social media platforms, and she said, "My brothers will not be a hashtag." And she is the oldest. But then she told me her dad said to her, because he saw the same thing, "We don't want you to be a hashtag either, because it's not just men, Black men, it's Black women as well." So I think the work continues. I think we're in the middle of not just a moment, but a movement. And it's up to all of us to seize the moment and turn it into a movement.
Mayor Broom, thank you for speaking truth to power. Mayor Perkins, I'll let you close out tonight.
Yeah, I actually said amen after Mayor Broom finished up right there. No, I want to thank everybody that's tuned in. The question is, what can you all do? And tonight is a fantastic first step, if this is your first step or if this is your 100th step. Listening to some phenomenal, educated panelists tonight that are passionate about what they're doing and really want to make changes informs you as listeners, and it keeps you educated. You know, I already kind of hinted at what you can do is be educated about not just, you know, what a mayor's job is, but also be educated in what the system as a whole can do. So I would encourage everybody to educate yourselves and educate those around you that are pushing this movement forward so that we can have holistic change. At the end of the day, I think we, again, would fall short if we just made changes at City Hall without pushing for changes throughout the entire system, because it's very much connected. Another thing I'd say to those, the 14-year-old, your 14-year-old, I would say to continue to keep your ears and eyes open and don't lose the passion for change, but not only tell them to continue to listen, but I would also just have all the listeners listening in to know that that's actually what we all are fighting for. I know we have seen things on TV. We've seen too many of our brothers and sisters killed by police violence, along with all the other traumas that we face, but and we're tired. You know, I have had days when I have been tired, but at the end of the day, when I think about those young people and I think about the fact that I'm in a position to change the future for them to where they won't have to go through what I went through, or even their kids won't have to go through what I have to go through, I would look at them not in a sense of pity by no means. I would look to our children for inspiration to really continue to push us forward on this mission. So I think those are the two big things. And the last thing I'll leave with is this. I was at a rally speaking, and I let my citizens know, hey, you can't love Shreveport and hate any of its people. And I just want everybody listening in from Louisiana to understand, hey, if you genuinely love Louisiana, you want to push Louisiana forward. And if you're talking to anybody else that's asking about this movement and what is it all about, let them know, hey, you can't genuinely love Louisiana if you don't love all of its people. So I think that's the end state that we're trying to get to envision like some loved one that's sitting in a penitentiary, or some loved one that's being pulled over by a police officer, or some loved one that's actually putting on the uniform as a police officer and wants to return home to their family at night. So I think that's the goal at the end of the day. That should be our why.
Wow, we got three preachers in the house. Sounds like I'm saying amen to you too. But I just want to thank you guys again. We cannot thank you enough for not just representing us, but for carrying us with you and everything that you do. And I know all three of you are doing just that. I'm going to close out for tonight. I want to thank all of our panelists, including our mayors, who were here tonight. I want to thank the 800 folks who registered for this webinar. If you happen to have missed it, it will be posted on urbanleaguela.org tomorrow. Please join in there. And also, please complete the census, the 2020 census. You can do so online, by phone, or by mail. We cannot forget that we are not just in a movement, we are the movement, and our voices are the power that we seek to change the things that we see in our community. Thank you again. I want to thank Judy Reese Morse again for her leadership and for all of the work of her team. Thank you again, and good night.